God damn, this game looks amazing. High on Life is a game that surprised me. I was expecting a very basic game that relied solely on its humor to carry it, and that isn't what we got. While the humor is certainly still the main draw, the gameplay has quite a bit more depth than I would have thought. I've even heard it described as a Metroidvania, which I do see some elements of, but I'd argue it's not enough to classify it as such. While the game does feature constant upgrades to both your combat and traversal abilities, it lacks the interconnected world really needed to call itself one. Nor does it have much in the way of requiring backtracking to progress, just to get collectibles. With all that being said, while the gameplay is deeper than expected, it's not enough to carry the game if you don't like the humor of Justin Roiland, who's most known for co-creating Rick and Morty. The game is covered from top to bottom in his style of humor, so no matter how good the gameplay is, it still isn't worth playing if you don't enjoy that. This has proven pretty divisive online, where you have people who love it and people who hate it, but that's just the nature of comedy. It's totally subjective. What one person may find funny, another will find annoying, and there's nothing you can do to please everyone. This is especially true when talking about dark and absurdist humor, which is how I describe everything Justin Roiland works on. Well, that mixed with improv, which is shown throughout the game as well, with a lot of characters rambling on for a dozen or more extra lines, sometimes even breaking character and laughing at the absolute ridiculousness of what they're saying. He also often breaks the fourth wall, reminding you that you're playing a video game and making jokes about potential DLC and sequels. Whether or not you enjoy the comedy is simply down to personal preference. Personally, I didn't find myself laughing at that many jokes, but I didn't find them annoying either. And a few of them really got me.
We're going to try to show up those cocky nerds in the weapons lab by fusing this human with some other aliens. Just hit the button.
No, I don't think we're qualified to make that decision.
Look, I can do it myself if you don't want to. I'm just trying to be nice.
Are you fucking kidding me?
That wasn't supposed to happen.
They died! What the fuck are you doing? Why'd you press the button, bounty hunter?
I think it comes down to my overexposure of his comedic style, having watched 4 seasons of Rick and Morty, 3 seasons of Solar Opposites, and played Squanch Games' previous work, Trover Saves the Universe. I found that game to be funnier, but that could just come down to me having played the game a couple of years ago, at a time where I hadn't been exposed to so much of Roiland's work. I mean, there's only so much gloopy floopy one person can take. The point is, if you still enjoy his style of humor, you'll be getting more of the same, and if you don't, there's no reason for you to play this game.
My name's Stan, and I sell vials of alien cum. I know that's probably not what you wanted to hear when you walked over here.
You play as an unnamed 21-year-old human with no job and no friends who sits around and plays video games all day. And so far, this just sounds like real life. Your parents are going on a trip, so you and your sister have the house to yourselves, and she wants to throw a party. As you're leaving the house to get party supplies, aliens warp in and consume your neighbor. One of the aliens shoots another and then they warp off. You hear a voice calling from the dead body, so you investigate. You find a talking gun, known as a Gatlian, named Kenny. He spits in your face to expose you to translation microbes so you can understand alien speech. Also, ignore how awful this is running. I played the game before the day 1 patch and the performance was dog shit, but after the patch it ran a bit smoother. Kenny explains that the aliens are looking to convert all humans into drugs as they experience a massive high when they consume us. Hence the game's name, High on Life. In the midst of the initial invasion, Kenny guides you through killing some enemies and stealing a warp drive, in order to warp your house to an alien space station where you'll be safe.
Welcome to fucking space!
As it turns out, it's not the entire alien race that wants to consume us, just an alien drug cartel known as the G3. Your gun tells you to search around and find Gene, a badass alien bounty hunter. And it's at this point I should probably stop saying alien, as everyone's an alien except for you and your sister. When you find him, he's a little less badass than initially thought. He's actually a homeless guy who's missing both of his legs. His bounty hunting days are over, but he's willing to help train you in exchange for a place to live. Well, sorta. He doesn't actually expect you to live, he just wants your house when you die. After receiving his old bounty hunting armor and meeting some friendly pawn shop owners,
welcome to Mr. Keeps Dipshit. We're your friendly neighborhood pawn shop. Buy something or don't, nobody even cares.
he sends you off to fight the first bounty of the game. This introduces you to the bounty system. Simply select the target you wish to go after and accept the bounty. Now there's not actually a whole lot of choice in this. You can usually only choose from 2 targets at a time due to the game having an upgrade system like I mentioned earlier. As you progress through the game, you'll come across new weapons and equipment that'll give you more traversal options, like a knife that doubles as a grappling hook or a jetpack. You'll need these items to progress in certain bounties, and since you often get an item after defeating a bounty, there's an order that you have to do them in. On top of the new traversal upgrades, there's also new Gatlians and upgrades for those. Every Gatlian has a standard shot and a special shot, and those specials operate differently depending on if you're in combat or not. While out of combat, they regenerate fast and are often used for traversal or puzzle solving, and while in combat they regenerate slowly, but they have unique effects. Kenny, who you already know is the first Gatlian you met during the invasion, operates like a standard pistol, and is probably the most well-rounded. His special is called the Glob Shot, which fires a bigger projectile that will launch enemies into the air. It's probably the most useful special in combat as it gives you some breathing room when you're taking a lot of damage. Aside from Kenny, you'll also meet Gus, Sweezy, and Creature, as well as one more, but that one's really late in the game, so I'd rather not spoil it by telling you what it does. Gus acts as this game's shotgun, which is unfortunately disappointing. He's in desperate need of a buff as his range is minuscule and you'll only ever kill an enemy with one shot if he's point blank. Plus he only gets 3 shots in between reloads. His special shot allows him to shoot a saw blade, which will either stick into a surface or bounce around targeting a couple of enemies. After a couple of hits it will lose power, but a well-timed melee swing will send it flying again. Sweezy acts as a needler and needle rifle depending on if you're aimed down sights or not. I find that she's also a bit underpowered as it takes a lot of needles to kill enemies. There are some effective methods with her. For example, loading up an enemy with a bunch of needles and then meleeing them will cause the needles to explode. But I can't say that it's something I used a lot. The most useful part about her is probably her special, which is a time distortion bubble, which will allow you to pass through spinning fan blades and use moving vehicles as platforms while out of combat, and while in combat, shooting the bubble will cause it to expand until it explodes, which does a decent amount of damage. Creature is an interesting weapon. I'm not sure there's really a good comparison for him. At least not off the top of my head. Basically he shoots out a bunch of little guys called his babies, which will target the nearest enemy and attach themselves to him to do damage over time. These little guys can do a ton of damage fast, which makes him the most powerful Gatlian in certain situations. He's especially useful during boss fights since the little guys can continue to do damage while the boss is moving rapidly. His special is a little purple guy who will attach itself to the head of an enemy to take over its mind for a little bit. If you shoot more regular little guys onto someone who's being controlled, it'll extend the control duration. The specials can also be altered with weapon mods that you can find or purchase at the pawn shop. For example, when I got a mod for Kenny, it changed his Glob Shot so that instead of firing one large shot, it shot a spread of smaller ones to affect a bigger area. Aside from mods, there's also weapon upgrades which you can buy from the shop that increase the weapon's effectiveness, like increasing damage or ammo count. Unfortunately, there seems to be a glitch that breaks these upgrades after loading into a new area. On multiple occasions, I'd have weapon mods reset to the base version, even though the mod is selected, and upgrades wouldn't work even though they were still in my inventory. For example, I had a mod for Gus that increased his ammo count from 3 to 4, but even after getting the upgrade, after loading into a new area, my ammo count was back to 3. For weapon mods, it's easy enough to fix by simply unselecting and reselecting the mod, but the upgrades can't be fixed like that. I quit out and reloaded, which fixed my ammo count for Kenny, but it didn't fix Gus. That glitch isn't the only issue with the game. There's another glitch involving the Hunters Forum, which is this game's version of challenges. I'd say it's most similar to Badass Rank challenges from Borderlands 2. It's just small stuff like kill this many enemies this way, but for some reason if you quit the game and come back later, all of them get locked saying you aren't experienced enough for them. This glitch is permanent for your playthrough, so even once I beat the game and loaded back in, I still couldn't access the Hunters Forum. From what I've heard, Squanch Games is already aware of this issue, so that one could be patched in the next update. Other than that, performance, while improved from launch night, still has some issues. In an odd PC choice, there's no Fov slider. Personally, this doesn't really bother me, but I've seen a lot of people saying that the narrow Fov gives them motion sickness. I was going to complain about not being able to change the movement key bindings, but as I was writing this review, they released a patch that fixed that. It was a little too late for me. I wound up just using a controller, which worked well enough, but at least it's there now. I also had this weird issue where I missed a jump and landed on a rock below it, and there was no way of making it back to where I needed to be. I tried falling and respawning and it just kept putting me back on the rock. Luckily, reloading the checkpoint fixed the issue.
You fucking suck!
The process of completing a bounty can take a while, with some of them taking as long as an hour and a half. When accepting a bounty, you usually aren't clear exactly where the target is, only the general area, and it'll take some exploring to figure out. This means a combination of platforming sections, solving puzzles, fighting G3, and interacting with the locals, some of whom can be a bit odd.
So, what exactly are you doing out here?
What? I'm fishing.
You can tell I'm fishing, right?
Oh, right, duh, of course, sorry. It's very obvious, yes. So, have you caught anything?
No, never have, never will. No fish can live down here in this sludge.
If there aren't any fish in there, why are you fishing? What is that? What's going on?
Because I'm still working up the courage to drown myself.
I mostly like the mission structure as it mixes things up. I'm especially a fan of the platforming as I think it's probably the most fleshed out aspect. However, I do feel like the other parts aren't as fleshed out as they could be. The puzzle sections are really short and often too easy. The few mini games are cool distractions but often short and aren't used to their full potential. Given how much this game likes to remind you it's a video game, it'd be nice if they did some more weird gameplay altering shit with its missions. And the fighting, while it can be a lot of fun, there's not enough variety in the enemies. It's a shame as the Gatlians are fun to use, but the enemies don't bring much to the table, especially considering the potential enemy types this game could have explored with how many alien species are around. Even the elite enemies in the game are just beefier versions of the basic enemies. They all boil down to either standing around shooting towards you or rushing you to melee. They lack any sort of real strategy. If you're lucky, they'll throw a grenade towards you, but that can just be hit back using your knife. This wouldn't be as noticeable in a shorter game, but in an 8 to 10 hour shooter, it can start to make the combat feel repetitive. On the other hand, the bosses do make up for it somewhat, as I do feel like the bosses in the game are fairly fun to fight, especially for an FPS game. They each have their own patterns to learn, making each fight a unique experience. Some of the fights can be a little tough too. I won't lie, I died during a couple of them. In fact, boss fights made up for all of my deaths. Most of the game is fairly easy, and while you can take damage pretty fast, it's really easy to gain health back, as well as pick up shield drops from dead enemies. The boss fights really are the only areas in the game that offer any sort of real challenge, well, at least some of them. I think this game also really needed a few extra tracks on the soundtrack. While the gameplay is fun, hearing the same tracks over and over again gets a bit tiresome, especially the combat music. I think that mixed with the enemy variety and the constant barrage of improv humor is part of the reason I think this game is better played in multiple sittings. Playing for more than 2 to 3 hours at a time starts to get tedious, at least for me. Don't get me wrong, I still had a good time playing through the game, I just don't think it lends itself very well to long play sessions. Overall, I think it could have used a little more fleshing out in some departments, and it could use some bug fixes, but I think it manages to be a fun time. I enjoyed the humor even though I didn't find it as funny as I thought I would. I really like the cartoon aesthetic and world design. It's got a nice variety of locations and some of these environments are gorgeous. I think my favorite location was during the Douglas bounty, where you're going through Dregtown, an underground neon city. It's genuinely fantastic. These locations, combined with the game constantly rewarding you for exploration, makes up my favorite aspect of the game. It's a lot of fun to parkour around looking for these little guys called luglocks, which contain currency you can use at the pawn shop and sometimes even upgrades. If anything, I was actually having more fun exploring after I beat the game than during my actual playthrough. These worlds are just such a fun treat to explore. That's not to say I didn't enjoy the playthrough. I thought the story was a fun adventure, although I do wish the choices were a little more impactful. Most choices in the game were non-consequential and usually just served for a comedy bit rather than an actual important moment. In the end, what I said at the beginning still stands. If you enjoy Justin Roiland's humor, it's really worth a playthrough. Otherwise, probably not.